Hi everyone, it's Alex Syberia Designs November holiday release, and we're celebrating with a video hop. My cards feature the gorgeous Midnight Blooms collection. I've used the stamp set along with the coordinating dies and stencils. These blooms are also available in hot foil plates. The backgrounds for these cards have similar beginnings, but when I finish them up, I'll be using a different new product on each one. I'm working with Distress Oxide inks, and for this one I'm applying Stormy Sky. The ink pad is angled so just the edge of the pad is catching the panel, and it's pulled across in diagonal sweeps. For this panel, I'll be working with a new stencil called Frosty Lace. Some tape on the back of the panel holds the stencil in place, and I'll be applying a dark blue called Chip Sapphire with a blending brush. I'm going to pop my panel on top of some paper towel to protect the surface as I apply some clear texture paste to the stencil. Although this paste goes on white, it will dry clear. The result will be a nice, shiny, clear finish. Stencil design will stand out from that striated background. Once I have a nice, thin, consistent layer of the paste, I remove the stencil and wash it immediately. The first step in completing the second background is exactly the same as the first one. I'm applying a combination of the Stormy Sky and Chip Sapphire to the panel. This background will be finished off with yet another new product called Magic Stars Hot Foil Plate. To ensure the design covers the complete A2 size panel, I'll be foiling this plate twice. With one side already foiled, I can go ahead, put my foil shiny side down onto the foil plate, flip my panel over, and foil the other side. And there we go, the full panel is stenciled with these pretty silver stars. With the backgrounds completed, I'm ready to start working with a really gorgeous stamp set called Midnight Blooms. I have a piece of oversized white cardstock in my MISTI, and I'll ink both of my flowers with Versamark ink, coat them with white embossing powder, and melt it with my heat tool. There's quite a bit of detail on these flowers, and so there's lots of embossing. As I melt it, I apply the heat to both the front and the back of the panel to minimize warping. The Midnight Bloom stamp set has a coordinating die set and also a coordinating layered stencil set. I stamped both of the flowers on one piece of cardstock, but I'm cutting it into two. This will make it easier when I stencil, and I won't have to worry about getting ink from one stencil onto the other flower. The stencils are numbered in the order in which they are to be used. A little bit of tape holds my stencil in place, and I'm going to start off by applying a very light pink to this first layer called Spun Sugar. First layer of color for the leaves is also applied with the first stencil, so I'm going to use just a strip of Post-it note tape so that I can protect the flower as I apply a blue-gray called Stormy Sky to the leaves. The stencil is lined up to the second flower, and the very same inks are being applied. Again, I use a little bit of Post-it note to protect the leaves as I apply Spun Sugar to the flower, and then move my Post-it note up and protect the flower when I apply the blue-gray. Stencil 2 will do the stem and provide some additional detail to the leaves. This time I'll be applying Chip Sapphire, and you may have noticed that these are the very same colors on the leaves that were used on the background. And then I go ahead, line up the second section of the stencil to the smaller flower, and apply some more of that deep blue. If you are not a fan of coloring, or quite frankly don't have the time to do it, layered stenciling is the way to go. The results are just amazing. The third stencil is lined up on the smaller flower, and I'm applying picked raspberry. This pink is quite a bit darker than the spun sugar that's on the base. And so when this layer is added in, it adds some beautiful contrast. And now for the fourth stencil, and this will add some additional detail to the leaves. I am actually going to be applying the chipped sapphire again, but I'm going to apply it pretty heavy-handedly. By the time I'm done, it will look like I've used 3 shades of blue, when in fact I've only used 2. This stencil has a little bit of additional detail for the flowers as well. Just like the leaves, I'll use the same ink that was used in the previous stenciling, but this time I'll apply a lot more pressure so that it'll have a deeper tone. And then the smaller flower is completed in the exact same way as the larger one. And I just love how these flowers came out. They are just gorgeous. And the beautiful teal coordinating dies are lined up and both flowers are die cut. And just to make sure that the dies do not slip out of position as they go through the die cutter, I use a little bit of tape. I really like how closely these dies cut the flower to its edge. Because I've used the same shades of blue in the stems and leaves that I have used in the background, I'm also die cutting sheet foam. The foam backing on the flowers will give it a little bit of elevation and help it stand out from the background. Both of the flowers and one of the backgrounds will be spattered with Dr. P.H. Martin's bleed proof white using a fan brush. Both of the panels have been trimmed down to 4 by 5 1/4 inches and are being adhered to A2 size card bases. The Midnight Bloom stamp set comes with some beautiful Christmas sentiments. You may have noticed that I took some embossing powder and put it on this little panel to see if it would knock off cleanly. And it did, but as a precaution, I'm going to use some anti-static powder just to make sure I get a nice clean sentiment. The sentiments are inked up well with Versamark ink to make sure that I get a nice clean impression, just like I did with the flowers. I like to use a pressure tool. Also, like the flowers, the sentiments are coated in white embossing powder. When heat is applied to cardstock, it will warp. I have made myself get into the habit, before I start melting the embossing powder, of having my heat tool turned on so that it is at full temperature. This will reduce the amount of time required to melt it, which means there's minimal warping. And again, I use a little bit of tape to hold my dies in place so that they don't shift as they go through the die cutter. There's absolutely nothing worse than going through all the work of doing something and then not have it die cut properly. The dies were also used to cut white sheet foam so that the sentiments would have some dimensions sitting on the card front. I'm going to finish off my flowers with some pretty bows. This is actually the name of the die set, and they are so sweet. I've used each of the 2 different sizes of dies to cut light pink, dark pink, and silver cardstock. 3 bows for each size will be adhered together, offsetting one bow from the other. These are fine die cuts, and putting the 3 together creates a fuller bow but still is light and airy. Then the bows are adhered to the stems of the flowers. The flowers and sentiments are arranged on the card fronts and adhered. And these are finished off by embellishing them with a few glass drops. These Christmas cards have lots of shine, perfect for the holiday season. I hope you enjoyed this video featuring a number of new products from Alex Syberia Designs November holiday release. Hope you'll join us in the YouTube hop. There is so much wonderful inspiration. You'll find your next hop stop in the description of this video down below. Thank you so much for joining me, and as always, I appreciate your visit.